welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Relli, founder and CEO of Project Purple. We have an exciting interview coming up with a very special guest after a few quick updates. Since 2010, we've contributed over $3 million and counting towards pancreatic cancer research efforts. We've also allocated over $1 million worth of aid to more than 1,300 patients and families through our patient aid programs. Your monthly or one-time gift can improve patients' lives through research and assistance programs. You can donate now at projectpurple.org. Pancreatic cancer does not rest, and neither will we. Your support is truly appreciated. If you're looking to get involved in one of our events, whether that means joining a run team, participating in a virtual run walk, group fitness, golf, or anything else you can think of, visit projectpurple.org/events to learn more. Without further ado, I want to welcome a very special guest to the Project Purple podcast. The head women's basketball coach at NYU, Meg Barber. And I'm going to read her bio here. Meg is coming off winning the Division III national championship for women's basketball. She has been at NYU for 6 years. Her record at NYU is 119-21. She's had 5 postseason appearances. She was as I mentioned, the 2024 national championship champion. 2023 Elite Eight, 2022 Elite Eight, 2020 second round, ECAC championship in 2019. She became the 11th women's head basketball coach for NYU in June of 2018. She also is a alumni of NYU. She played there at NYU during, she graduated, in 2002. And during her playing time, she was 93-18. And a couple other factoids here. She's got an amazing resume here for all the work she's done. She worked with many Division I, Division II schools before she got to NYU, but she was also named the Division III Hoops.com Coach of the Year and the Metropolitan Basketball Writers Association Coach of the Year, while being a finalist for the Women's Basketball Coaches Association, the WBCA Coach of the Year. And most recently, she was also selected as the head coach of the USA Basketball Women's U17 national team, which went on, this is wild, the hits just keep coming, Meg, to win a gold medal at the FIBA World Cup in July down in Mexico. And she's also a Project Purple alum, having run a couple of New York City marathons with us. So welcome to the Project Purple podcast, Meg.
Thanks for having me. That's quite an intro. So it must be the purple.
Yeah, and you wear purple every day, right, which is like, it doesn't get any better. And I just want to, so another couple factoids here. I did some research here. So last year was the first time that NYU had an undefeated season. You guys went 31-0. It was NYU's second national championship. You guys won in 1997. And Division III has had a national championship since 1982. So NYU now has 2 national championships. So congratulations, tremendous success. The team in 97 went 29-1. So you beat that mark by going 31-0. So it's been awesome. I know we've known each other since you got at NYU.
Yeah.
For the last 6 years. Full disclosure, your dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and I was fortunate to meet your dad, which I know we're going to talk about later, a little bit later in the podcast. But it's just been so awesome from afar to see your success. And I know we always text each other, and you know, we're friends on social and stuff. But it was just been awesome to see you, and I thought it would be great to have you on the podcast, because I think what I have seen over the last 6 years, what you've built and what you've done is just amazing. The success you had. And as we were talking a little bit before we hit record here, success doesn't happen by luck. There's no luck in it. It's a lot of hard work. It doesn't also happen overnight. But the success that you've had there at NYU with the women's basketball program, I think a lot of our listeners can probably relate to in terms of what they're trying to achieve, whether that's fighting pancreatic cancer, whether that's fundraising, you know, for one of our many teams, or if that's helping to raise awareness. So you obliged, you said, yes, I'd love to come on the podcast. So here we are. So I'm ready to throw some questions at you, Meg, if you're ready.
I'm ready. I appreciate it. And what a great opportunity just to also connect with all your listeners out there. So looking forward to it.
And when we end this podcast, we're going to make sure everyone goes out and follows the
That's right.
NYU women's basketball team on all social. And then also, we're going to share where they can learn more to hopefully attend some of the games this year, because you guys just opened a brand new facility last year and you guys travel quite a bit. Like I know the conference you guys play in, you guys go down south, you guys go out to the Midwest with some of the teams, you even get up to New England. So it's just not based here in New York. But so, first question for you is, how do you define success? Like, what's your definition of success?
You're starting with a loaded question.
First of all my questions are loaded, so let's get that out of the way.
I think, certainly sitting in a head coach's seat and having, the transformative, opportunity to work with different teams year in and year out. The number one thing that's really stuck out to me through the years is that your success is really defined, through the course of the process that it takes to get to, wherever kind of society deems that end goal to be. I think success is ongoing. So for me, there kind of isn't a definitive like start and end. In terms of each season, obviously we set goals, but really we talk all the time about it's not so much a scoreboard or a win-loss column, but it's the process and the growth that we go through as we're experiencing things and as we're going through the season that really ends up defining the success. Also, our ability to work together, in terms of being on a team. I think the most successful teams that we've had, you can point to the intangible characteristics of that team and just a feeling in the locker room of people that are willing to sacrifice for, the teammate next to them, players that are willing to, not just be in their role, but be the best that they can be in that role, even if it might not be a role that they see as the most impactful, because often those roles are the ones that are the most impactful. So to me, success really is just about the process that we're going through day by day and bringing our best effort to that process every day.
So I know in doing my research, a couple other factoids that I did not mention. Not only has your team had great success on the court, and yes, this is important, but in the classroom, the team has been as successful. So I know just from looking here at the notes, the Violets also have been cited as the WBCA All-Academic Team, sporting the 16th highest GPA in all of Division III. So I asked that success then, and let me ask this question. Success then means in every facet of what you do.
Yeah, that's literally a tagline for our program is how you do anything is how you do everything. So even just how approachable we are within the NYU community or the New York City community, how we're presenting ourselves in the classroom, how we're approaching problems in the classroom or on the court, having that same mindset to attack a problem head on and not look for an excuse or look for, kind of a way around it, but find a solution. And again, obviously there's a lot of bumps in the road. I mean, we had an incredible year last year. So being undefeated doesn't always mean that there weren't defeats, throughout the year. So just how you're bouncing back from some of those setbacks, I think just teaches us a lot in terms of, for our players, especially how to kind of go out into the world when they've graduated.
So many questions just came up in my head. So do you guys, let's talk a little bit about the team here for a second. And you don't have to name any particular kids, either current, past, or future, but do you look for certain things in kids, like when you're out there recruiting? Because clearly, I mean, we're based in Connecticut. Yes, there's been a lot of controversy. I don't know if you saw it, Meg, like the governor decided to stick this big sign at the border saying Connecticut's the basketball capital of the world. Now,
yeah,
in all fairness, I know that UConn men's and women's team have won a lot of national championship at that level, but there's been a lot of talk from both sides, men and women's team here in the last couple of years about certain kids and buying in. And clearly coaching has changed, right? The rise of social media. You've got now the NIL. thing that's in there, right? Um, so are you guys, do you say no to kids, or what type of kids are you looking for when you go out in the recruiting?
That's a really great question. Yes, we say no more than yes, and a lot of that is, I think, first and foremost, you need to understand where you are as a coach, so NYU is a busy place, right? There are a lot of opportunities that kind of pull our players in many different directions, whether it's academics, internships, and then obviously being in New York, just a social aspect of being here, and then you throw basketball into that mix. So it's a very multifaceted experience almost every day for our student athletes. And so first and foremost, we need players that have a proven track record of academic success. That has to be the first thing we're looking at. And then we need players that we feel like are both academically curious enough, and just, kind of their internal motivation is to not be afraid of new opportunity, because it can really kind of stunt your development here, if that's kind of your modality. And there are certainly other schools and other places where people will walk on campus and say, this is a great fit for me. But you definitely need a sense of discipline and a maturity to be here, because there's just so many things that can kind of, in a sense, get in the way. And our players do a really great job of time management, and just, we call them our big rocks, like putting in the things that are most important to them first and fitting them into their day. And then, kind of seeing, what other time they have, and how else they can kind of utilize their opportunities here.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say those things. I mean, I always say, you never see the struggle, right? Like you never see those things that people are doing behind the scenes. And as a parent, you always, like myself, tell my kids, like, hey, like when no one's looking, that's when you want to like really rise to that occasion and do all the right things. When
Yeah.
everyone's looking, it's easy to do that, right? When the spotlight's on you, but like you got to put in that work, and it doesn't happen. Like we said, like it doesn't happen overnight. You just don't show up and put up what you do and have success. It's all these little things that lead up to those bigger things down the line. Can you think of like, and maybe you could use an example, but like maybe an obstacle that you guys experienced like in the previous season, and maybe a strategy that you guys use to incorporate to kind of overcome that. And where I think about that is like, whether it's patience, having, bad numbers, or, runners training and they get hurt, a little, bump in the road. And now like they've got to kind of reshift focus. How do you guys handle those obstacles on that way to success?
Yeah, we obviously, it's daily that you're encountering obstacles as a coaching staff and as a team. And I think those things can be experienced very differently. Running a program or being a part of a coaching staff, we are trying to navigate sort of, it's like advanced scouting, like what issues might arise. And so obviously part of that is just having coached for over 20 years. I've been in situations, it's like the bus took us to the wrong airport. We now have to rebook 20 flights, and get to JFK instead of LaGuardia. And so there's those minor things that are sort of, okay, like that just requires more money, more time, and, obviously patience, to kind of overcome this one thing. There are other things, like you mentioned, like this year, we had a player tear her ACL for the second time. She was a previous starting point guard. She was kind of in like our starter slash six-man role, and had a lot of experience for us. And she was kind of the heart of the team player. So when she went down, it really affected everybody, because it wasn't just that we lost this player, it was her energy and her positivity. And instead of her bringing that to practice, she's now on the sidelines and she's down, because she's going through this very emotional, she was a senior, just emotional roller coaster of, it's my senior year. Am I going to be able to get back? So that was, obviously a huge hurdle. And, as a staff, it's always kind of next player up mentality. That can sound transactional. I like to be more of an authentic relationship person in terms of the way that I run our program. And so it's just to get over those kind of hurdles, it's keeping everybody in the right frame of mind. And before anything like that happens, sort of preaching the right language of,
Mhm.
we talk all the time, everybody's role is important. And when you could least expect it, your number could be called to do this really important thing in front of, as you alluded to, in front of all the fans. Whereas all the other days you're prepping behind closed doors and no one sees how ready you are, but you're ready. And when that time comes, you're just going to crush it. So it's like constantly trying to build people up, even if they might not be in the role that has them as the star or, winning all the accolades. Those roles are going to inevitably be almost more important than the people that are getting a lot of the accolades, because if you have a hole that you can't fill, it's going to dramatically impact, a team or organization much more than, someone who's, just kind of adding on to a hole that's already been filled.
Yeah, I've always said like there's no such thing as luck. It's just being, and this goes to business and sports. Like it's not, again, like you just don't show up and get like that starting job, right? Like you got to
Right.
put in that work. So it's always about being prepared when the opportunity presents itself, right?
Yeah.
And what does preparation look like? Well, that's relative to everything that you do. And I think we talk about this like from, you mentioned, the mental aspect of it and communication, which is really critical, with a lot of things. I mean, that's just life, right? Like, having the proper mindset and then, communicating properly is probably the two most important things on how you manage life.
Yeah.
And whether that's a cancer diagnosis or whether that's like, fundraising. It's just so powerful. So I love that. I love that. Going into this season now, so you come off all the highs of winning. You haven't lost a game in over a year, right? When was that? It's probably the NCAA tournament going back to 2023.
23. Yeah.
Yeah. So are you doing anything different going into this season? I mean, school just started, so the kids just hit campus, what, like 3 weeks ago, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you guys did go to China with the team. So were you
Yeah.
able to bring your new kids with you or just the existing?
No, nope, that was a little awkward in a sense. You can't bring in any of your new players. That's an NCAA rule for our level. So unfortunately, we could only bring sort of half our team. We got 9 practices with that group before going to China. So we did get this, pretty big chunk of time with half our team, and
That's
then
so
they came
wild.
back and
So
now.
freshmen were not allowed to go?
Yeah, you have to be full-time enrolled the semester before you're allowed to
Oh,
go. So no freshmen were able to come. Yeah. But
wow.
now
Okay.
obviously everyone's back. Yeah, my approach to every season is that, so we label our teams like last year was team 101 and this year is team 102. And I do that to identify that, we call our culture here the sisterhood. So it
Mhm.
runs very deep. I got, during our national championship run last year, I had someone reach out whose mom was in a nursing home. She was, like 89 years old. I think it was about to be her 90th birthday. And she was following us. She had played basketball at NYU. So I really like to connect that history for our players to understand, that they're part of something that is bigger than just the 4 years, potentially that they play here. However, within that entire timeline, each individual team will sort of never feel the same, right? It will probably never be coached exactly the same. There's going to be different strengths and weaknesses, certainly the relationships, and then individual experience, being a freshman, being a senior, being a grad student. Those are obviously all wildly different as well. So each year I really try to just watch the first like practice or two to just see, okay, like what are our strengths? Who has gotten better? Who is maybe bringing something that they weren't bringing last year? Because I think by not doing that and by just jumping in and saying, okay, this is what we're doing, I've always done it this way, you can sometimes negate, something that might be staring you right in the face and you just don't see it because you've already decided like this is what I'm going to do. So obviously there are core fundamental things that I do that are the same, but
Mhm.
a lot of how I dictate like how we're going to play and what we're going to do is based on the new players coming in, and then obviously, the returners and kind of where they've taken their game over the summer each year.
Where do you find your motivation now that I mean, I know in any business, right? You've reached the top of your business, right? Like you won a national championship, you went undefeated. Where's the next piece of motivation come for going into the season? Do you have
Uh, you
press
know,
clippings from all the haters over the last couple of years? Anything negative?
yeah, it's interesting because I told our team when I took this job, I said, the first circle I stood in, I said, I want to be like the New York Yankees. They just kind of looked at me. I said, I want to be hated because, it's like the Patriots. It's like these teams that have won and you can't really point to anything they've done wrong. They just sort of keep winning and they're doing it the right way. So for me, in a way, winning the national championship and being undefeated, it still feels almost like imposter syndrome. Like as much as it's hit me that it's happened, it was never our goal to go undefeated. So, there are elements of it that are like, wow, that really happened, but it still almost feels like a dream. The one thing I can say, and this is very relevant to where I am right now, I think like I'm 1000% at a place that I believe in, and my values align with NYU and with coaching college basketball here. And I've had other jobs where certain things have aligned and maybe one or two things haven't. And so, obviously you mentioned I'm an alum and I've walked sort of in the shoes of our student athletes, even though it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But just being in a place that I believe in and can honestly recruit to authentically and lead authentically has made this job like I don't need motivation because it has made the job every day almost not feel like a job. I come every day and I get to coach basketball, which I love, but I'm not like trying to sell something that I don't actually think is worthwhile in terms of the investment or the time spent in terms of being a student athlete here. So that's the best part. I sort of don't need, extra motivation on top of that to come in and work, do my best at this job.
The hair on the back of my neck like went up when you were saying that because if you love what you do, it's not work, right? Like it just
Mhm.
becomes love and passion and you can like to your point, when everything's in alignment, like it just like success is going to happen, right? It's not that like it's not arrogance or cockiness, but that's what what happens. Like you have like just like you're all in, and that's really genuine, and people can see that. It's not as if it's like fake it to make it or anything like that, right? Like the
Mhm.
kids can see that, and parents most importantly can see that. I want to shift a little bit here and talk about mentors. You've been at this, like you said, for 20 years. Um, who've been some of your mentors along the way, on this journey? And have you picked up maybe one or two, here in the recent time that you've been here at NYU?
That's a great question, because I think you're always trying to expand your toolbox, right? And mentorship is such a huge part of that. The reason I got into coaching can be traced back to first my dad. He was my first coach. And I was fortunate enough to go to NYU really through like his efforts in terms of believing in me and kind of pushing me. And when I landed at NYU, it was my first female coach that I'd had for basketball. And ultimately, she became, not only my first mentor, but probably my closest mentor. And she was a mentor in life more than just basketball. Even though she was a basketball coach here, when I started coaching, like all of our conversations were more about like life and growth and kind of like next steps. And then when I came back here to take the head coaching job, she's almost put on like a second mentorship hat. So it's been like a new mentorship role. She's still here, so I didn't directly replace her, but she's still working here in the department as a senior women's administrator and associate AD here. So she's now my boss and mentor. So it's been really fulfilling because she coached here, so she's been in these shoes, and so the nuances of every job being different and um, some of the struggles in a sense of collegiate athletics and the changing landscape of collegiate athletics. It's been great to have a voice that's lived it. And then a lot of my other mentors, they're people that I've worked with and for, either in a small capacity or large. One of my closest mentors was my first Division I opportunity, Deb Taylor. She gave me a shot at my first D1 job. I was 3 years at a D3 as a D3 assistant, and I moved out of New York State for the first time in my life. And so, just putting me on that pathway to success. And I think that the most important thing is I've really benefited from mentors that are both supportive and also really have like pushed me and helped me kind of take those steps. I could be very comfortable and just stay where I am all the time, and that would be perfectly fine with me, but there's always kind of potentially something next, even if it's not in your professional world, if it's personal, or something you're doing outside of, the NYU coaching job, but still within the framework of kind of where I want to grow professionally. USA Basketball is a great example of that. And some of those mentors have opened those doors for me too, which is, truly a highlight of my life.
So awesome. Let's talk a little bit about your dad. I know you mentioned him there.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to meet your dad while he was fighting, and I know how proud he was of you getting the job. I remember that conversation, and
Yeah.
what was it like this season? Getting to that point. I know we were texting
Yeah.
a little bit, but like, what do you think? Did you ever have like that moment where you like, oh man, like you felt like your dad was here, or like he was
Yeah.
watching from above?
I mean, literally daily, the championship was so special because when I got the head coaching job at NYU, I drove up. I was in Philly. I drove up. He was in upstate New York to tell him the news before it kind of broke on the NYU website or anything else. And I was in law school at the time. I had just finished my first year at Temple Law, so I knew it would be a shock. I didn't even tell him that I was applying. But I knew that he kind of missed basketball and that I was only not coaching for 1 year. And I drove up to tell him, and he thought like I was transferring law schools. I was like, "What do you think?" Like there, And when I told him I got the job, he just like exploded in tears. And he came to so many games that first year when he could. And then he passed away over that summer. So, and he basically was like, I made it through your season. Like that was the most special thing to share. And he gave me a little charm. And so that charm has been in my pocket every single game that I've coached since he passed. And so before every single game, I talk to him and kind of rub that coin. And again, we had a connection through the sport of basketball that also brought our relationship as father-daughter so
Yeah.
close. And I never dreamed of winning a national championship at NYU, but I remember standing up on the ladder, and I looked out and my sister was there, my whole family, both my sisters, my niece and nephew, my mom. And I just was like, I know you're here. Like that. I just was like, I literally I can't believe I'm about to cut this net. Like it was so surreal. But I really felt him in every way, shape, and form, partly because my first game ever that he watched, we lost. He came to my first game ever that like tipped off at NYU. And after the game, I was like, oh my gosh, Dad, we're so bad. Like I think we scored like 36 points in the whole game. And he was like, you're pretty bad. You're pretty bad. Yeah. However, you need to like let your team feel like you're out there with them. Like I can see you searching for your answers on the sideline of like what you can do next, but like let the team feel that you're like behind them on the sideline. And it like literally changed my whole coaching style, where I just was like, you're right. Like I need to push joy and positivity and my own competitiveness and my own sort of energy into this game if maybe we don't have it on the court. And that's the way I've coached like ever since that first game. So to win a national championship and be coaching that same way was like this real like full circle moment of, him being a part of my coaching time here, even though he, wasn't physically here.
Wow, it's so powerful. And you look back at, the success you've had since that first season is pretty amazing. Just looking at, 2020, well, 1920,
Yeah.
21-6, 2021 was the COVID year, but then 21-22, 25-2, 22-23, 25-3, and then 23-24, 31-0. So your dad saw 50% of your losses.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but he's seen all the rest, the success from
Yeah.
above. It's just really, really
Yeah.
special. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us and our audience. It's just such a testament. And though I think that's like such a powerful thing though, Meg. I mean, like people tend to try to be who they're not, right? And just be who you are, especially in today's world, right? Like what's going on with everything, right? And so like just be true to yourself, be the true you. You don't have to be something that you're not, whether it's like, and I'm sure you see it with the kids, like social media is such a big part of our lives,
Mhm.
right? Like we were, just saying before, like, you got there's some kids on these NILs at every program, right? And they're not even they're good athletes. They're not the best athletes. I'll be kind, but
Yeah.
they have a million Instagram followers, and they've got these six-figure NIL deals because of what they put on social, not because of what they do on the field or on the court or wherever they play, right? So it's just, is that really genuine who those people are? Probably not. Or maybe it is, I guess. Maybe they are really good at, doing dancing and not really good at athletics, but, the dancing means more than, but, getting back to it, such a powerful lesson, to be who you are and let that shine through and the success that you've had has just been amazing.
Well, to date us, I mean, think of the like athletic and coaching movies when we were growing up. It was like scream and yell and then dramatic
Cheers.
music and then like the team wins, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't work today. And even though screaming and yelling doesn't work outside of that, it's just not a part of my personality at all. So, to your point, I can't fake that. Like even I think one practice a year, I'll really raise my voice and kind of snap us back into like reality of like, okay, what are we doing? Where are we? And the players will be like, oh yeah, that was really impactful because it's like the one time, the whole year that you really stepped out of yourself to point us back in the right direction. So no, authenticity definitely always wins.
Love it. I love it. Let's talk a little bit about the game itself. I've been a big fan of basketball. I played 30 years ago now. It's crazy. The years like gets old, farther and farther back. But the women's game, and I've always appreciated women's basketball, has really kind of had this like shift, I think, in the last 5 years amongst all the levels. Not just, I mean, I think what happens in professional kind of makes its way down to through the levels of collegiate basketball, now into high school and travel. What do you think? First question on this is like, what do you think is like the reasoning for that? Like we've seen like crazy. I mean, there's women doing things that like this is not sexist comment, but like, would you, I think there's people, I mean, I've seen it and I think I've had a close enough piece to it where like, yeah, we kind of saw this coming, like, the deep threes, the athleticism, the defense. I've always said, let me just say this first. The women's game, for anyone who is trying to learn how to play basketball the right way, the women's game is better to watch than the men because it's fundamentally sound. It
Yeah.
is fundamentals, which the men's game has kind of gone away from fundamentals, and it's all about athleticism and stretching the
Mhm.
core and shooting these crazy shots. But women's basketball is so fundamentally sound.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, single-handedly you can point to the media exposure of the women's basketball game specifically, but also just women's sports. I mean, thinking back to, the women's soccer, and sort of celebrating women being athletes. And I think, growing up for me, it was really hard to even like picture, first of all, there was no pro league. So, but those two things kind of went hand in hand, like this establishment of pro leagues trying to take off and then media exposure. And then those two things sort of growing together. We had the like UConn Tennessee rivalry, when I was growing up, but that was about the only game in the women's game that you were going to find collegiately on TV until maybe the national championship. So
Yeah.
I think the push in terms of just numbers of young girls picking up a ball and doing their fadeaways in the driveway just like the boys do, those moments of falling in love with the game there are just so many more opportunities for that because a little girl can turn on TV in the summer and see a WNBA game. I mean, I'm obviously in New York, the New York Liberty. It's like watching an all-star team play. So I think that has, wildly expanded just the volume of girls. And then certainly once you have volume, you're starting to, the competitive nature and the athleticism. And now you're getting like the cream of the crop is dunking and, doing all these other things. So, it's just been such a fun thing to be a part of, especially, here in New York, even this year with our title run, I was like, well, the New York media will never catch on because we're in New York City. Like we literally are competing with the Knicks media and the Nets and whether it's baseball, football, we have two teams for everything. And suddenly like at practice, we had multiple reporters and news outlets and things like that. So the willingness to put women's sports on TV, I think has just dramatically influenced the growth of the game.
Well, Meg, I'll just say this. I think the NYU women's basketball team has been the only team to win a major national championship or league championship of any of those teams that you just mentioned in the last like 5 years. I guess we'd have to go back to the Giants beating the Patriots, I guess, if we wanted to, I don't think the Nets have won much in the last couple of years, but that's another story. The Knicks look pretty good, but then, yeah. So being at that national level, though, like you coach that U17 team, I mean, like, talk a little bit. I mean, so the ladies at that level, I mean, that's like the cream of the crop, right? Like these are eventually going to be women who potentially may play in the WNBA if they're fortunate enough, if they keep that track. Are you just seeing like just the athleticism and like what are you seeing at that level? Like, if you compare, and I know you've been in the game a long, not trying to be disruptive, you like you said, 20 years. So you've been around a lot of basketball over the years. And, I always tend to say like, just like for me, like I'm in this space, but like you're invested in that space, that space inside and out, regardless of what level you're at. You're seeing kids from all different ages at different times, probably, and as they develop, and some that don't develop as best as others, and where they fall in. But like, what are you seeing now at that like elite level in the 17s that like we probably didn't see 10 years ago?
Oh my gosh, that was really eye-opening because obviously I have, been a part of that growth in terms of my coaching, but I haven't been coaching at UConn and South Carolina and these programs where they're watching those prospects in, 7th, 8th, 9th grade. So, I mean, certainly you just pointed to it. The athleticism is just, it's eye-opening. I mean, I was, able to be a part of a couple camps before officially being named the head coach for that team. And like practices would end with someone dunking and you were just like, this person's 16, right? Wow. And so I think, just the first of all, the courage that it takes to show up with 45 other people to try to make a 12-person roster when you've been one of the, if not the best player in your state at any age group, to see that courage of these. I mean, we had a player who was 14 who made the team.
Wow. On a U17 team?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. We actually had two 14-year-olds and one of them turned 15 in July. So right before we headed to Mexico, we like celebrated her birthday, with cupcakes on the court. But just to see the courage and sort of the ability to like take in that opportunity and attack it head on and, have to put aside this like you're the all world everything, because maybe in that environment, or maybe when we're playing Japan, we don't need you to do that thing. We need this person to do that thing. So to see the selflessness and the camaraderie of that group of, young women was, honestly, I left me, the most impressed, because, they have every ability in a way, like people would almost just generally think, oh, they must be so selfish or self-centered or want to score. And they were really, really willing to put aside everything. I think the USA basketball culture, they do a really good job of teaching everybody, like, this is about USA basketball. This isn't about your individual, point total within USA basketball. So I think culturally, there's just such a strong feeling there of what the values are, that these players are walking into a competitive environment, but then know how to kind of put things aside to be the best they can be. The other piece that you mentioned, I mean, it's crazy. Like, we're at lunch and someone's like filming what they're eating and doing and talking, because they are getting paid to promote whatever the product is. So, finding ways to, like, okay, we're doing this, and now I actually have to say, like, you can't have a phone for this one thing, which I never thought I would have to say, because you're doing like a paid advertisement for something that I know nothing about. So just they're balancing, I think, so much more than we ever had to balance at that age. Some of them are, essentially working like full-time jobs with these paid partnerships. As much as that you were saying it looks fun, or, oh, they're doing this, it's like, it's like very, I think it weighs on them a lot as well, because they might not be able to just sit at a meal and eat a meal. It's like, oh, I forgot I have to do this thing. So they're juggling a lot, and again, I think the biggest takeaway was just they were amazing young people, like, just really, really impressive people.
So wild. It's interesting. So you mentioned, like, and I've heard this before, clearly we were just in the Olympics, and,
Hmm.
both women's and men's team, winning. And, there was a lot of talk about sacrifice, right? Like, it's
Hmm.
Team USA is about the shirt on the front, the name on the front, right? Which is the
Hmm.
country. And, there were plenty of examples between both sides, like players that really sacrificed. But then interesting, as we talk about the game itself, in particular women's basketball, and I mentioned, a couple times, we've seen this explosion. And I was listening to WNBA, NBA radio last week, and they were saying, like, the one thing that we've, like, like this, the stats are there, right? Like, the women's game, the WNBA is exploding,
Hmm.
absolutely exploding, which will benefit all women's basketball and hopefully bring fans from that were non-basketball fans, women's basketball fans, into all levels, right? Like, and to your point, this is where I think is really exciting as a basketball fan and as a women's basketball fan as well. Is like, you have these little girls now watching, the Caitlin Clarks, the Angela Reeses, the Sabrina Ionescu, the
Hmm.
Stewie. We're I think in New England, tri-state, like, we've been spoiled, right? Like,
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of these players, but
Yeah.
now we're talking about, like, a world stage, where we're getting, this game is getting world attention for what's happening. And
Hmm.
so now you'll get that next generation of players to get involved. And, to your point, yeah, you'll have that funnel will rise, and the cream will be the vast of women playing basketball will be greater, right? Do you think, though, and the point I'm making here, a little long-winded, is, like, they said, like, the WNBA success recently has been because they've allowed the players to, like, have their personas come across.
Hmm.
Like, they've kind of keyed in on some of these people, um, and allowed them to be themselves.
Hmm.
And that has come off. Some people have liked them, certain players, and some people don't like certain
Hmm.
players, right? Which is, I look back at, and it's always like, I think there's always that comparison of the NBA, right? And, like, the NBA was this, like, decent league until Jordan came in, right? And he
Yeah.
became this persona. And yeah, you had MJ, or you had Dr. J, you had, like, Magic. I mean, it was probably, I would say Magic and Bird were, like, the first two. because they
Yeah.
were like, Batman and Robin,
Yeah.
that they were like this contrast and two different coasts. And now you're starting to see that a little bit in the WNBA with certain teams, clearly the success that the Aces have had. New York, as you said, has got an all-star team on their
Hmm.
roster and have played at a really high level. So do you think we're at like this tipping point with the pro game, which eventually, will trickle down into the rest of, women's from all levels of college, AAU, and high school?
Yeah, I mean, you just named it, the Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark.
You
Uh,
went there. You went there.
yeah,
All right.
it's because it's a rivalry, and I think that was the growth of the NBA was rivalries. And to your point, you nothing is a rivalry when people aren't actually themselves because it is inauthentic in a way. So I mean, thinking back even to the first couple drafts and all the women had the same exact like style suit on,
Yeah.
and like and then it like it just to even just if you were to look at draft pictures through the years of like even being able to be drafted and wear a designer brand and kind of like look the part for um what it is you've accomplished and being a top 10 draft pick. I think all of that and the sponsorship and brand recognition and all of that is just bringing a whole new element, to not just fandom, but to the even the fans who have been long-term fans to, be invested, like maybe actually not liking a team as opposed to just like being a Sue Bird fan or, being a Diana Taurasi fan. Like that's very different than following a team and having like fandom for a team, which I think for the WNBA has not really existed as much. It's been the UConn fans that continue to follow the UConn players. And so now we're getting like, no, I'm an Aces fan. Like that's my
Yeah.
team, or I'm an Indiana Fever fan. That's my team. And I think that's kind of what the Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese has like added to, this whole the buildup in a sense, because obviously it's like, before you can run, you have to walk and then, before that crawl. So we've seen the development, but it is a exciting time for women's basketball right now.
So last question on this, and then we're going to move on. Do you think this is just the timing? Because again, like we were talking about success, like you had to do everything in order to get there. Or is it, like they say, the chicken or the egg, like which came first? Or is it the fact that, like, hey, you have these transcending players that just the opportunity is right?
I think it's literally like lightning in a bottle. It just feels like it was like the exact perfect timing for this to happen. However, the foundation was laid with the players who were getting no publicity,
Yeah.
and the games weren't on TV, or when they were, it was only the championship. You couldn't get a regional game in your region
Yeah.
that was on TV. So I think those players kind of having laid that foundation of continuing to put out their best effort and the best product that they could to then help create the Caitlin Clarks and the Angel Reeses. And the list is obviously endless in that regard. That's been really neat to see. I hope, rewarding for the players that have kind of gone before. I'm sure they would love the some of
Yeah.
the money that's on the table now. But and then I think the other piece that often is like just not discussed is the professional men and just in general like men's fandom of the game. It's such a weird, it's like it's either like trolls on social media or like hardcore support. There's kind of no in between, or you
No.
just ignore it and you like
Yeah.
go follow golf or some other sport, right? But I do think like the NBA players supporting the WNBA sort of not even counterparts. It could be like it used to be, oh, this is, the Lakers also have the Sparks, but now it's like these are have more of a feel of like these are independent teams and fans are just fans of who they want to be fans of, including the NBA players. And I think just sort of like getting that okay has like opened up fandom for the women's game.
Yeah. again, I've always been a fan. I
Yeah.
think, and growing up in Connecticut, going back to Jen Rosati, right? Like,
Yeah.
you and Rebecca Lobo. Like, I met Rebecca in an airport 2 years ago, and I was like all geeked out. Like, I was like a little kid,
Yeah.
meeting Rebecca Lobo for the first time. I mean, so it's just, I think it's just wild. I've always had that respect, but it is pretty wild to see like this tipping point that we're at. And I just hope it goes through all women's basketball because I think it's a great game. And if you haven't watched a women's team at a very high level, like an NYU, you got to get out there and cheer on this team. So let's talk about that, Meg. The season's coming up. I know. Well, you guys, I Division 3, you guys start pretty early, right? It begins like in a couple weeks, right? You guys start
Yeah, we get
official practice.
yeah, we get 8 practices now before October 15th. That's a new-ish rule. So we are actually starting this Friday with
Oh,
our first official
Friday the 13th,
Friday
right?
the 13th. We're
Ooh,
going for it.
spooky.
Yeah, yeah. So
So, and then you guys will official like every day, October
mhm,
15th, which I know is
mhm.
like in college basketball, they do like Midnight Madness. There used to
Yeah.
be like now I'm aging myself. Now we're aging
Yeah.
ourselves, going
Yeah.
back to like Midnight Madness. But
Yeah.
then the season will start. You'll start games in November.
Yeah, we start in November. Yeah.
Awesome.
November 8th or 9th or so, we're playing MIT and Babson in the Scholars Classic here to tip things off.
And you guys have a wonderful, beautiful new facility. So for our listeners and watchers in the New York City area, where's the best place? You got to get to NYU because the gym is phenomenal. I've seen video and pictures, and I know it
Yeah.
was a long time coming. You guys were up at like Hunter College or somewhere,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
doing your home games. But so where's the best place for our fans watching and listening to not only follow the team, but also get kind of the latest and greatest, the schedule and everything. Because you guys do play in the conferences, that conference where you've got Carnegie Mellon, you've got Emory,
Yeah.
you've got Loyola,
Brandeis.
yeah, Brandeis. So you guys are
Yeah.
traveling quite a bit throughout the
Yeah.
season.
Yeah, I mean our social media handle NYU Women's Hoops, we update that regularly, whether it's Instagram or Twitter. And then our facility, obviously in downtown Manhattan, is worth a visit. And then elsewhere, all of our games are streamed online. So even if someone's sitting at home looking for something to do, you can always click on our schedule and find our live feed and also replays of our games. The one thing that's really cool, and if people can get out, especially if you have kids or grandkids, these teams are accessible. Our players stay after, sign autographs, talk to little girls, talk to our fans, talk to our students. So it is a really, I would say, just a way to get connected to a team, which might not always be the case with a pro team. But our players, love that element of connecting with fans, even if it's, through an email or through a message on social media, something like that.
Awesome, awesome. I love. I follow the women's team on Instagram, and you guys
Yeah.
put out a lot of. Whoever does that, I know it's not you because you got
Yeah.
plenty of other things to worry
Not
about. But
me. No.
the team does a great job with the
Yeah.
content, and it's great to kind of see some of the student athletes as well because from time to time they'll kind of mention the kids, and it's just great to see some of the personalities. So Meg, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Project Purple podcast and sharing your keys to success and all the great success you've had there at NYU. We look forward to watching you this season. I'm not going to say anything. You're going to have success, and how that's determined is that. And but I can't wait. I love last year was really really cool to see from afar all the success, and it couldn't happen to a better person. I truly mean that. I know how much hard work you put into it. And I was fortunate enough to meet your dad, and how special that whole connection and everything that and all the success you've gone through is just really, really cool. So thank you for being a guest on the Project Purple podcast.
Thank you so much. And I would like to just reiterate how special Project Purple was to me and my dad and my whole family on our journey. So I know a lot of the listeners are connected, but I would just encourage anybody to get connected if you're not, because it was really, through such a challenging time, a life-changing opportunity for us. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you like what you hear today, feel free to share this episode. Make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. That's a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. Thanks for listening.